All right, I think it is time to kick off. Thank you everyone for joining today. This is, as I just mentioned, our fortnightly session on anything and all things Kubernetes. Our topic for today is Ingress and Cert Manager. So for those of you that are new to that, exposing your applications or APIs securely from internally to your Kubernetes cluster to external access. In terms of hosts today, there are always a few of us on the calls. As usual, I am here, Chris Jones. I am a group product manager here at Platform 9, and I look after our Kubernetes platform. I also have Brandon from our DevOps team. We keep him busy, and thankfully he's found some time to come out and start sharing some of his operational experience. Our SaaS management plane is all Kubernetes applications, and he is part of the team that helps keep that running. That's including our free platform and the growth and enterprise. So he uses a lot of, obviously, Kubernetes applications, as well as keeping clusters running and all of the, what I call infrastructure applications around it, things like Ingress and Cert Manager. So that's a great person to have on the call with us. We also have Mike, who will be stepping through the demo. If you've been on these calls before, you might have met Mike. He's part of our technical marketing team and gets hands-on into the nitty-gritties of how Kubernetes functions, how to do things the right way, and sometimes live on Twitch, streaming how to just do Kubernetes whilst bashing your head against the wall. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mike to cover off what we will cover. As always, these sessions we put on for all of you, our attendees. So if you have questions, doesn't matter if you're using Platform 9 or any other version of Kubernetes, we just want to make sure that you are being productive, learning, and solving problems. So ask questions either through chat, through Slack, or if you're brave, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask a question live. If you do that, we will just ask that we keep it to one question so we keep enough time for everyone to jump in as well. So with that, Mike, it's all yours.
Awesome. All right, so today we're just going to go over installing Cert Manager. So we make it kind of easy. We've got the app catalog with Cert Manager in there. We're going to install Ingress Controller. So we're doing Nginx, which is in the app catalog as well. We're going to walk through a demo of deploying those, and then I'm going to actually deploy a deployment and a service and an Ingress resource. We're going to show how that works, and then I'm going to go through it and I'm going to modify it and add another deployment and another service behind it, so we have two services and deployments running behind a single Ingress resource. So let's get started. I'll try to slow down talking a little bit too. All right, so we're going to start out in our UI. We're going to go down to the apps. We're going to add a repository. So I've got the repository over here. I'm going to copy it. Now this is using our certified apps. So I'll show you in a second what that looks like. It'll give you a couple of things you could deploy that we've already certified that'll work. So within that, you've got something like Cert Manager and the Ingress Nginx with a load balancer, which is what we're going to do. So we're going to start out deploying Cert Manager. You can deploy this, via the CLI if you wanted to outside of this on your cluster. We're just trying to make it easier, and we're managing it with Helm, so you can deploy it and upgrade different versions. Like right now, we've got 2 different versions. We're just going to use the latest, and we're going to deploy it on our cluster. And right now, our cluster is actually running in Amazon, and we're going to use Amazon's ELBs, and I'll show you how to set that up. All right, so deploy this. This is going to take a minute or two to finish out. Usually, we may see an error because it may take longer than 2 minutes to finish it. That's something that we're working on that we're actually going to fix so that you won't see the error in the UI, although it still does deploy. So once we get this deployed, we'll go over and we'll deploy Nginx Ingress. So right now, I haven't done anything on the command line. I'm just using our app catalog to deploy these 2 things. And what this is going to do is Cert Manager is going to install a cluster issuer for us. It's going to install custom resource definitions. So you'll have the idea of a certificate and a couple of other things that are actually needed. Previously, before the later versions of Cert Manager, you had to go in and create a certificate by hand, which you still could do. You've got a cluster issuer. So a cluster issuer, which is what we set up, will issue certificates for the entire cluster, whereas if you have a single issuer, that's going to be by namespace. So this cluster issuer will be something that you could use across namespaces. Like say you've got developers, sectioned off into different namespaces, and they need to use a issuer. They just use this one instead of each one managing their own issuer within each namespace. I don't know, Brandon, if you got any ideas beyond that, like what's the production way to do it? Usually it's like a cluster issuer and just get everybody to use that when they're deploying in their annotations, like just reference it, or do sometimes you use issuers instead of cluster issuers?
On the clusters we are at the moment just running with cluster issuers, since we have one team working on the cluster. The cluster issuers, we have a couple of them, like for a production context or for a dev context. But yeah, create multiple other issuers and segment those out on separated out by teams would be a good way to limit certain teams' access to certain certs. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So like difference between like a production and a testing is going to be a different endpoint for the server right here. Right now we're just using Let's Encrypt, and for like production stuff where you're going to be hitting it and getting certs, you want something like this. If you do it too many times, like you're just testing stuff, like creating something quickly and then deleting it, you may want to use a non-production level one so that you don't get rate limited, right? Because I think that's one of the issues you run into if you're just creating the resource over and over again to test out and fix it. Like if it's not working for you, like you get rate limited. Is that correct, Brandon? I think that's what I ran into a while back. I don't know if that's still true.
I haven't run into that one myself personally, but yeah,
Okay.
I'd be very surprised if Let's Encrypt didn't rate limit their public endpoints. They're being used by a lot of people.
All right, so now we're going to create our ingress controller. So we've got Cert-Manager running. We're going to create an ingress controller. So these kind of work well together because when we create an ingress resource now, we can actually reference Cert-Manager, and Cert-Manager. I'm guessing if Cert-Manager is working like ingress controllers are, what they're doing is they have access to and they're monitoring ingress resources, and they're looking for something with the annotation. And then once they find that annotation, they look for information within the resource, and then that's how they build the cert. Would that be correct, Brandon?
Yeah.
Awesome. Just making sure everything I'm saying is correct. Brandon's he's the expert. I'm just the person that knows how to make demos and has been playing around with it. So here we go. So we're just going to name it Nginx Ingress. We're going to put it in the cert demo cluster. We're going to leave it in the default namespace. Now, for a lot of these things, like if you're running on a cloud, here, I'll hit deploy. Like say you're running on Amazon and you're using Amazon's service, or Amazon's like EKS, there's probably going to be or even like Google's GK, there's going to be an ingress controller already configured for you. And that's going to probably be running in like their custom namespace that they're adding in after they deploy the cluster. For us, we're just putting it in default, but in production, you probably want to put it somewhere else so that it's not just showing up in default. If someone's like listening there, like you might have like a Nginx Ingress namespace that you're deploying this to. But for simplicity, we're just going to put it in the default namespace so that we can kind of show things off easily. I don't know if there's no questions yet. Feel free to ask any questions. Like so far, we've just, like I said, just deployed Cert-Manager and Nginx Ingress. Now we're going to go to the command line. Well, first we'll show that these apps are deployed, and then we'll go over to the command line. All right, so we put them both in default. They're both deployed. All right, let's go over to the command line. So what we can do is something like Helm list, and we'll be able to see that they're both actually deployed with Helm. All right, so now that we've got that, what we can do is we can see our cluster issuer, which is right there. So Cert-Manager. So this is something that you'll actually need to know when you're setting up an ingress resource, because if we look at the ingress resource file, in our annotations, we're actually going to reference that. So this is our ingress resource that's actually going to set up our ingress for us by having the Cert-Manager.io cluster issuer and then referencing the Cert-Manager cluster issuer. It's going to actually create their certificate for us without having to set any of that up. All right, what else can I show? So if we do a kget deploy, we'll see the Nginx Ingress deployment, which is just running a pod right here. And if we take a look at that pod, we can see that it just has like an Nginx configuration file. So what it's doing is it's just monitoring the ingress resources. And then what it's going to do is take that information, put it in the Nginx conf, and then it'll reload it. And then what's happening is you've got a, here, I'll show the other service. You've got a load balancer. So here's a load balancer service right here. And here's our public endpoint for it. It's just sending traffic that comes in on that to this pod, which is just running Nginx. And it's going to take the configuration from our Ingress resource, load it into Nginx, reload Nginx, and then it'll distribute traffic based on that configuration, which I'll show that after we actually set it up too. All right, so now I know what my endpoint is. What I have to do now is actually set up my DNS record with this. So I've got in my commands, I've actually got the command to run. All right, so I'm running this domain in DigitalOcean. So I'm gonna use their CLI and update my record. Oh, I'll have to update it with a dot, sorry. There we go. All right, sweet. So now I've got my DNS record set up that's pointing to this load balancer endpoint. So anything that goes to demo.mpeterson.com is actually going to come through and hit that. Oh, we got a question. Hit that load balancer and then go to the Nginx Ingress Controller. And then once we got the Ingress resource set up, it'll figure out where to send the traffic. All right, so let me see what the question is. Oh, it's Chris. All right, if you have a question, Chris saying, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. All right, so we've got that set up. We've got we've got demo.mpeterson.com pointing to the load balancer that's pointing to Nginx Ingress. So now what we need to do is go ahead and create some resources. All right, so my first resource I'm going to create is a Hello World deployment. It's not really Hello World, it's just Echo Server. I'm just calling it Hello World. So this is just like a simple deployment with a single pod where it's just, or a single container in a pod that's going to kind of show off like us actually hitting an endpoint. So let's go ahead and create, oh, I'll show you the service too. So then we have a service that's just going to create a cluster IP that's pointing to that. And then we have our Ingress resource. So what the Ingress resource is going to do is we're telling it that we want to do TLS. We're telling it what the host name is. We're telling it where to save the cert. We're telling it the host again, and we're telling it where we want to send traffic for a certain path. So we're just going to do demo.mpeterson.com/ and anytime traffic sent there, it's going to go to the Hello World service, which is going to direct it to the Hello World deployment. So let's go ahead and create that. Create the service.
Which namespace are you putting all this into?
It's all going in the default. So
Yeah.
if I do a kget ingress, if I'm fast enough, which I wasn't fast enough, you'll actually see what happens is Ingress will create another Ingress resource very quickly. It'll create it so that you can do the challenge with Let's Encrypt, and it's just telling it where to send the traffic for the HTTP challenge file. But after that's done, like I wasn't fast enough to get over there. After that's done, it goes ahead and it configures everything. So you can do like a kdescribe ingress. What we're looking for is to see if the certificate is getting created. It is scheduled for sync. So what it's going to do is take the information from this, put it into Nginx and reload it. So let's get the, make sure the cert is actually ready. It is ready, true. So what that did is it went and it asked Let's Encrypt for a certificate for demo.mpeterson.com. It was successful. It got it. And so far, like always, we haven't actually deployed Cert-Manager on our own. We just did it through the UI, which makes it super easy, so you don't have to manage it. If you're doing it via the CLI, you would have deployed it and then set a bunch of the stuff up like the cluster issue and all that. So you'd have a lot more YAML files. But with this, you just need a couple and then the UI to deploy everything. So let's go ahead and see if it works. There we go. All right, so that's the Echo server just putting out information about once we hit it. So if we take a look too, we have a SSL cert or TLS cert, connection secure, and it's verified by Let's Encrypt. All right, so that's interesting, right? Because you're just doing it for one deployment, but what you really want to be able to do is have an Ingress resource set up and split traffic to multiple deployments and different backends, right? Like, so like say maybe you're doing something simple, like you've got your blog site is behind like a certain, I don't know, deployment. And then you've got like your tutorial site or something like that's behind a different deployment. So you got different teams working on the site and they're just using not using like, I don't know, WordPress or something. That's all included. So what we'll do is, let me move this so I can see. I don't know if you have any questions or anything, Chris, or anything to add, Brandon, so far.
Yeah, I
So
was
far,
just going to ask. I mean, I've gone through this process myself and definitely hit some challenges. Just for the, I guess, people on the phone that might be getting started, will namespaces impact the deployment of an ingress resource?
So your Ingress controller needs to have access to be able to read from other namespaces, and then it'll just look for any ingress resource. So I think that's going to be like a different, different policies to actually have access to that. Like if you set it up to have access to all namespaces, then what it's going to do is look for any ingress resource that's created. So you can put this ingress controller somewhere else and then just give it permissions to be able to read from it. And then what it's going to do is look for, like I said, the ingress resource. It's going to run through like the reconciler and apply it to where it's running. But then also Cert-Manager, you probably put it in a different, like the actual Cert-Manager deployment, you'd probably put in its own namespace too. And then, like I said, the cluster issuer should have access to all namespaces, and then that'll actually look for the ingress resource, I'm guessing now, and then reload based on annotations that call it out.
So if someone's using specific namespaces, right? Just to call this out here.
Yeah.
Everything that Mike's doing is just being dumped into default. That's why if you're seeing the terminal commands, there's no namespace specified. So
yeah,
if you are creating things in different namespaces, obviously the cluster issuer for Cert-Manager covers the entire cluster. If you're using an issuer that's scoped to namespaces, correct?
Yeah, so the issuer is going to be per namespace. So that's to say, like, if someone was just like doing some testing and they didn't want to create like a cluster issuer, I mean, there's other use cases, but if they didn't want to create a cluster issuer that everybody could use, they just wanted a single one that they're using. Maybe they're adding like their email address or something like that, and they're just doing like testing because they don't want to use the production. So they're using like testing or staging or something like that. Then they could put it in their own namespace and they could use that. The benefit of the cluster issuer is that everybody can use the same one without having to manage or think about it. But like, yeah, you can still do like a single issuer per namespace. So what he's saying is like this stuff right here would not be in the default namespace. It should be somewhere like in a Cert-Manager namespace or something like that. And then this should also be in a different namespace so that if people are working on a default, or if you're just messing around a default, you won't see it. Right now, I'm just making it so it's easy to see in the demo. You can see everything running without having to go through each namespace. Maybe Brain's got something to add too about namespacing with this. Like, you just have to give it permissions to be able to read from it, right? Like, or does the Nginx Ingress Controller that we deploy, if we change the namespace, have permissions automatically added for them? Like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The way that would normally go with the Ingress controller is, yeah, you could deploy it in a namespace and give it access to the entire cluster. That's how it would get deployed by default if you're using the Helm chart or most of the guides you can find online for it. Or if you deploy it into a specific namespace and configure it to only look for ingress resources in that namespace, then that's how you would filter it down. Off the top of my head, there must be some permission going on in the background with the way that the Ingress controller operates on the cluster. But I don't think I can explain that accurately.
Gotcha. All right, so what I'm gonna show here real quick too is this is our current ingress resource. And if we take a look at it, we've got the host, and then we've got a single path with the backend, which is actually, but it should, I think it's the, okay, so it's just a cluster IP 32. Actually, it's different IP. Sorry about that. It's just a single path that goes to this backend. And what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to add another path and another backend, and then I'll show the resource again. So I'm going to go ahead and actually delete this one real quick because I'm going to set up a brand new one and show it off. So delete hello ingress. And now I'm going to go over and show off hello universe, which is going to just give us a different pod. So it's using a different container image, same port. We're going to create another deployment that's going to be separate from the other deployment that we just made. We're going to create another service. Basically, these look the exact same. I'm just using a different container and different tagging for it. And then we're going to do a multi backend ingress. So same information. What I've added that's new is just added another path to it. So if anybody hits the same URL and uses hello universe instead of just /, it's going to go over to this other deployment. So The benefit of that is that I'm using the same load balancer IP address for multiple deployments and services behind it. So I don't have to have a load balancer per deployment that I'm doing. So this can get really complicated, but really helpful if you just want to use a single public IP address, like, or load balancer for it instead of creating one per. So that's where Ingress is really helpful, right? Like otherwise, like if you've seen like some I don't know, examples and walkthroughs, like you're just creating a load balancer for each thing that you create, and that can get pretty expensive. All right, so let's go ahead and create this. So I'm going to say create, and K is just an alias for kubectl. In case anybody was wondering, I think it's super common. People end up using that. I picked it up just so I don't have to type it out every time. All right, so we're creating the deployment. We're going to create the service. And then we're going to create the ingress. And then let me go over here and see if I can catch it. Too fast. All right, before, like I said, what it'll do is it'll end up showing like a second ingress thing, and there's not quick enough to catch it to show where the challenge file is. So let's say get cert, is the cert done? Cert's ready. Describe ingress. And we're going to look at that ingress resource again. Now we've got two paths. We've got a path for slash and a path for hello universe. Now, if we go over to the web browser, what we can do is, so I can see, we've got this page working, and then we can go to hello universe, and yeah, hello universe. And that's basically most of what the demo is. I can go in and show more things like, oh yeah, let's go ahead and show what's actually happening behind the scenes. So if we take a look at the pods running and we find our ingress pod and we go into it, and then what we do is via Nginx, let's look up the domain, and we look at the domain, we can actually see what it's setting up, right? So it's just an Nginx configuration that's automatically configured and set up for you and sets up the certificate. So it just automates a lot of the stuff that you used to be doing by hand, or setting up like your own certs and then putting it like on a single server, that's like a web server, like running Nginx, right? Like it's just doing that. It's not super complicated behind the scenes. There's just a controller that's watching for ingress resources to be created. Once it gets that information, it pulls it in and it adds it to the Nginx configuration file, and then it reloads it. So like if you see here, like this is saying server name demo in Peterson, and we're looking for this location of hello universe, and then it actually has some variables already added in there that tell it where to go for that, right? Like, so it's saying the service name is this, service port, and then just directing traffic for us. If we find the other one, and it just does some more configuration for it as well. All right, so if we look at just, sorry, let me find the slash one. I think I just skipped it. Slash. Let me look at the location. Sorry, for trying to find location. Anyways, that pretty much shows off what I was trying to show off for there. So like this one, it's just hello universe location. I don't know. Do we have any questions or anything like that? Like this, after like I learned about Ingress and how it's just a Nginx running behind it. Not every Ingress controller, right? Some Ingress controllers aren't Nginx related. This is just the Nginx Ingress Controller. Some cloud providers use this, or they use a fork of this and add their own things, and where the magic actually comes in for each of the different Ingress controllers is going to be within the annotations, right? Like, so if I take a look at this annotation right here, like I'm just using a single annotation for Cert-Manager to specify that. But if we look at, sorry, let me go back into the Nginx Ingress Controller real quick. If we look at the Nginx config, it'll actually show us some of the options that you can set up, like a force SSL redirect. All right, so like what you can do is you can configure some of these values by using a annotation, which you would just put in there, like Nginx force like /force SSL redirect, and what it'll do is set this to true for you, so you can force SSL redirects for people that are going to HTTP, so it'll force to HTTPS and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. I don't know. You got anything to add, Brandon or Chris? Like that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes. I went kind of fast. I was hoping let's go take a little bit longer for it. We have some more questions.
I'll add a quick clarification about that permission question.
Okay.
I was just looking that up in the background. If you really did want to limit the scope of access for a ingress controller, it actually uses the same permissions pattern that any other pod in Kubernetes would, using service accounts and cluster roles and stuff like that. And that's a whole topic for another webinar itself. But that is the same pattern. And then on the annotations note, yeah, there's all kinds of different annotations for the Nginx Ingress Controller. Like Nginx is highly configurable, and a lot of that is exposed through exactly this long list of annotations that you can put on an ingress resource, even to the point that if you want to or need to write raw Nginx config, there's an annotation that you can put that config in, and the controller will write that to the config that the Nginx process itself is using.
Yeah, like if you go to the Nginx documentation too, you can find all these options. If you're using a cloud provider, they should have everything documented too. Their annotations might look a little bit different. Like you might be using a different prefix, and then might be slash something different than what you're using in Nginx. Like maybe it's not force SSL redirect, maybe it's just like something else that they've written in. But for the most part, like it's just going to work the same way, just different annotations. So it's kind of useful on the big providers too, to be able to do that and use their ingress controller. Although if you don't like their annotations, or their annotations don't meet all of your requirements, then you can deploy your own ingress controller and set up a load balancer and do it yourself instead of using what they have. Like here's like some of the options. I mean, there's just so many options in here. Most common ones that I ended up using were just like SSL redirect and stuff like that, but it wasn't a super complicated application or anything. You got any questions, Chris? Anything I can keep going over?
This is a lot of details in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
Without questions coming in from the audience, if someone's been running a cluster, they've got, let's say applications or API endpoints that's exposed on a load balancer, why would they look at deploying an ingress controller? What benefits would they get there?
Okay, so you could change. All right, let me go back to the file. So if you've got an API endpoint too, you could set up all these different paths to send it wherever you want, right? Like say you've got maybe an API endpoint with a option that gets hit like all the time, and you need to scale that up to be able to deal with the traffic coming in for it. You could have a larger deployment issuing responses for a certain command, and then you could have like less of them running for ones that aren't really that commonly used. I mean, I don't know if you get that granular, right? Like that's something you could do. I don't know if is that even really a production level type thing, Brandon, that you see, like if you're using like all these different paths and stuff and sending it different deployments to break up your API, or maybe even like different versioning of the API. I guess you could do that too, like have a different path for it.
You totally could. So one use case I think where that might be handy is API versioning. If you have an application that you want to, release a breaking change in the API, common pattern would be to have a V1 or V2 in the URL to route that accordingly. But if you have an application that wasn't written to support that ahead of time, that could be hard to do. But using the ingress controller and the path rewriting that Nginx Ingress is capable of, you could add that versioning into the ingress path and then route to two different pods of the application itself. So you can sort of make up for that feature missing in the application by having the ingress resource take care of it, which is one example. Other than that, it's very much there's more than one way to do it thing. You could break up your ingress resources into many separate ones for organization's sake, or you could combine them all into one if they're all related to, say, one API. There's a flexibility to it that'll depend on your use case.
Gotcha. And then like another thing I didn't really show off is you can do multiple domains in here, right? Like you can have multiple domains instead of just a single domain for the ingress resource, and you can use the same load balancer for multiple different domains because it's looking for this host right here, right? Like the ingress resource is just looking at hosts, and it's just setting up the Nginx file for each host and then just routing traffic based on those. So it's also useful, yeah, for expanding beyond just a single domain and not having to buy a bunch of load balancers to put behind it or point at it. I think in stuff like like Knative and stuff like that, it automatically provisions this kind of stuff for you. And then they have stuff where it's like wildcard certs and then wildcard domains. So you can just set up a bunch of different, it sets up custom domains like whatever .yourdomain.com, and then it'll provision a certain stuff for you too. So like this kind of stuff's getting used in other projects, which is kind of interesting as well. Like it kind of makes it a little bit more I don't know, like I said, a lot of the projects are using this to automate stuff. Like Knative is just automating a bunch of Kubernetes components by giving you a single file that translates into all of these things and sets them up for you.
Yeah,
some other projects I think are doing it too.
If people are setting up, let's say on premises versus a cloud, I think that's an interesting point to sort of double click on as well. You've been saying that if you're in the GKEs, AKSs, EKSs of the world, that cluster is going to spin up with an ingress already running, correct?
Yeah. So far as I'm aware, it spins it up already for you, so you can just use it, and it sets up a load balancer service for you when it deploys the cluster, so you can use that.
Which is similar to what we do when we build in AWS or Azure. We don't add ingress. That's something that's in the app catalog for people to go and explore. If someone's doing this on-prem and let's say using kubeadm, this is something they're going to have to be aware of if they want to add it in, if they've been in a hyperscaler service and start coming on-prem, right?
Yeah. So like if you're running on premises and you don't have like public endpoints, or does I mean like if you don't have like a public API address or a public IP address that you would point a host name to, like you would use something like an internal certificate registry and stuff like that, or you would use like self-signed certs. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, even just the whole process of having to add in the ingress controller.
So you
the difference between sort of building it yourself and going with a managed service, be it from anyone, is the inclusion of some of these things. So I'm just sort of calling out that if you are, learning Kubernetes and getting started, and you've used a hyperscaler service and you thought, I might just spin up the VM or two and try to do this myself, in your data center or your laptop. This is one of the elements that might not be present in that cluster. Yeah.
So you could do something like deploy your cluster, bare OS with PMK, install Metal LB, put the IP address range for Metal LB, which is going to give you load balancers and stuff on an accessible network in your data center, or in locally a cluster IP address that's accessible outside of the rack, right? And then if you say you've got like a something like a Palo Alto or something like that sitting, like a firewall or something sitting on the edge of your network, and you've got public IP address space, you could do something like point the public IP address to your firewall, and then you could map that to one of the IP addresses, cluster IP range, and then you could still do something with like Cert-Manager and get certificates provisioned that are public search. You just need a way to, like all Cert-Manager and Let's Encrypt are doing, there's two ways to do it. So we're using HTTP 01, which is a little bit easier because it just hits your domain and looks for a file that's present on there to say that you basically own the domain at a path that you specify. So the Ingress and Cert-Manager setup automatically do that for you. It happens very quickly, and it does a challenge and it hits it and it sees if it's there. The other option is like DNS, to where you set up a DNS record saying that you own this domain, and you tell your configuration that that's what you're using, and that certifies that you actually own the domain. But say you're using HTTP 01, you've got a firewall, you've got public IP address space, so you can just NAT to IP address space within your network that you would use for the cluster IP range. So like load balancers, so stuff that's kind of like outside of the cluster that people are hitting, like developers, if they're just testing internally. You could still use this and get real certs. Or if you don't want to have public IP address spacing at all, you could just do something like self-signed certs and accept it through there. Or I think you can change the actual certificate authority and do internal certs like that.
Yeah, how would someone deploy Cert-Manager just doing like a cluster issue that's using self-signed?
So you would change, you would add, I think I've got that document. You would add, instead of doing like the Acme endpoint and stuff like that, you would say that it's local. And then with the annotation, I believe you do self-signed instead of saying, use this issue, but self-signed. Brandon, I don't know if you can expand on that. I've only done that a couple of times because most of the places I'm deploying it are in the cloud.
Yeah, using self-signed certs in that way isn't one that I've encountered either. Like, especially with Let's Encrypt, it's pretty easy nowadays to get those short-lived certs, like even for dev purposes.
So I think the use case for the local one is, yeah, say you're in a cluster that you can't get a public IP address to, which means you can't point a public host name to anything to get it certified, and it would just be like all internal stuff. Yeah, I think it's just here. I did a blog post with some examples, and let me bring that up.
I'll add a developer point of view here to this, because you guys you're getting there, you're almost there, and that is, when I'm developing my application, like when I'm developing it locally, I'm probably going to be working with HTTP. But to tell you the truth, I really don't want to care about that, right? Where does the SSL, where's the termination happen? Does it take it all the way down to the application, or does it happen at the load balancer or whatever? The tools that you're giving me here as a developer, I don't necessarily have to care about that anymore, right? Because if it's a self-signed cert, we're internal, we're on the intranet, you can just do a self-signed cert or verified by some internal CA, certificate authority, and fine, right? Just give me a good, valid connection. And then when it gets promoted up to a more public way or publicly accessible, it's just going to switch the CAs and all that, but the application doesn't really care at all.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing here is you guys are from a platform point of view, you're giving the developer the ability to not care about that and just use the same annotations, the same everything, just move it between the environments.
Well, the annotations might change, but that's something that you could like, if they're deploying and maybe you've got like a default ingress resource for staging, right? Like it'll just have that within it, and they'll just deploy using that. And then for production, you might have a different ingress resource that references a different cert or different cluster issuer that's actually using prod. Like,
Okay,
I don't, Brandon, is that close enough, Brandon? Like that's what I think you do. Like you would just have like templates for what you're doing. Like maybe you have a Helm chart that they just drop their application in, and for like a staging, it's got a different ingress resource with different annotations. And then for your production, you're using, like I said, different one annotations for prod.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're both describing two sides of the benefits of abstracting the ingress layer from the application itself. So developers don't have to worry about those details of, what host name the application is receiving and getting a certificate specific to that host name. All of that can be configured on the different clusters. So whoever is managing the clusters and the ingress side of things worries about those details, but then developers just write an application that receives HTTP, and then that can be moved from one cluster to another, without having to reissue certificates. At least not reissuing them manually.
It depends on how advanced you are with your group, right? Like if your group just cares about just creating a GitHub repository and then you build images off of it, or if they're building images and then also doing a deployment, or if they're managing Helm, like it depends on that, on how much they're actually going to touch it, right? Like if they're just doing a deployment, then they don't care about the service or the ingress resource, and you're just managing that for them too.
And from a SecOps point of view, I guess a DevSecOps point of view, I'm also thinking about the traffic here, where, as I said before, where's the termination happening? Ideally, you want to take the encryption all the way down to the application, and not until it gets to the application is it decrypted. And then the application runs and all that. So over the wire, I'm seeing capabilities here, but as a programmer, I don't really care about that. I can build one application. I can create my artifact there. I can promote my artifact between different environments. All I need to do is just manipulate the Kubernetes or the manifest that's being deployed and decides all that. But I can still get Uber encryption, all the way down to the application. But I don't need to worry about certs and things like that. And that I'm loving that. Loving where that's going.
I think it terminates at the ingress controller, unless I'm incorrect. Brandon, have to correct me a minute. I think it terminates at the ingress controller, and then you're just building your applications to take HTTP traffic within the cluster. I guess you could build it to do something different than that, but that's how it works, right, Brandon? Like you're just like you said, you're building something that takes HTTP traffic, not necessarily HTTPS, so it's not doing a search or anything between like the ingress controller and the actual service, and then the deployment.
This is another case of both options are possible depending on whether you want to encrypt all the way down to the application or not. going back to the annotations, one of the ones that we saw briefly was that SSL backends. So you can tell the Nginx Ingress Controller by having a ingress resource with a certain TLS cert associated with it, the Nginx controller will terminate a TLS connection from the customer, but then it will re-encrypt the connection to the pod itself. And there's some more details, like you need to set up a certain certificate to use internally within the cluster, like for that connection from Nginx to the pod itself. But from customer to Nginx is one encrypted connection, from Nginx to the pod is, so if someone is, trying to man in the middle somewhere in the infrastructure between there, you get the benefits of a fully encrypted connection.
That is really cool. So I can actually use the internal CA and don't need to know anything about a public CA at all. That is cool. And yes, you're exactly right. The man in the middle attack's like totally gone there, because yeah, that's awesome. Cool feature.
Awesome. Sorry, my demo went so fast. I talked through it fast. It just kept going. You got any other questions either, Chris, or something I could expand on maybe, or Brandon?
Maybe we should throw it out to the audience. There's a few people here. We'd like to see if people have run into challenges setting up Ingress or Cert Manager, or both together, or different approaches they might be using in production that they would like to share with people.
I can admit, like, something that took me a while is that I was using, so there's a lot of old annotations out there. So like if you're searching for an example for Ingress and it's just not working, for mine, like I was doing the K8 Cert Manager IO, and it was like like K8 Cert, and it was like this, and it just didn't work, right? Like, and every time I tried to set up my my deployment, I'd describe Ingress and it would be like an error, or it wouldn't set up the cert, or it was like I can't find the cluster issuer, right? Like, so make sure that you're using up-to-date annotations for the version that you're using, because even some of the old stuff may not work if they've modified any of this. Like, I think this used to be under like K8 Cert Manager. Now it's just Cert-Manager.io with cluster issuer.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that, I mean, if people are getting started, or even if you've been using Kubernetes for a while, that's common. I've been hit with that on API versions, annotations, all sorts of fun, where you're sort of just staring at it going, why is this not doing what it should be doing? I guess the perils of a fast-moving open source project. There's a lot to stay up to date with.
Yeah, like these change to like alpha v1 and stuff like that. So like you'll see old Ingress resources with maybe like alpha or like beta, v1, and they're different, right? Like they could have different options within them. So you want to make sure that it's updated. Like I ran into old ones too that were alpha and beta ones on there. And then what happens is some of this information is configured differently in here. Like they've modified it. And it says I'm expecting something else.
It's definitely the same for Cert Manager. There's a lot of great content out there created by everyone around the world. Definitely the API version for Cert Manager, if you're looking at issuers and stuff like that, make sure you are going to their docs and checking for the latest correct YAML files and specifications. If not, you're going to run into the same problems that Mike was talking about for Ingress, but you'll hit it with Cert Manager as well.
So I don't know if you got any questions, or even maybe like generic stuff about what someone would like to see next time. Like what are people running into issues with on Kubernetes that they would like explained or talked about, or even just getting like a generic kind of overview of, so that they can explore it deeper. I don't know if we maybe can get a question or two about that. I know Ingress is one of the higher ones. Like security is pretty difficult. What else? So like
there's a topic I've been thinking about getting into, which is a secure communications tunnel, an SDK called ZDI. There's a,
how do you spell that? ZIDI?
ZITI. NetFoundry is the company that runs it. This stuff is pretty cool. It's an SDK. It's also Kubernetes native. Can run as a sidecar. Been playing around with it on Platform 9 and working with one of the ZD solution architects. This is a really great option. I think we should do a session on it. It's not dissimilar to Ingress, but what it really does allow you to do is a point-to-point VPN over the internet for almost anything running in a Kubernetes cluster, or you can integrate it directly into your applications. One example that I've got up and running with ZD is exposing cluster services that are internal. They don't have a load balancer. They don't even have a node port specified, right? They just got a cluster resource, and the ZD Sidecar is able to tunnel traffic from the client that you install on your desktop, phone, what have you, and it securely tunnels the traffic right through to the cluster. So it's a pretty innovative way of creating globally accessible, secure access to applications. So I think this would be a fun next topic for developers and for operators.
Awesome. I don't know if the audience is interested. I have a demo too that I want to show off eventually too, where it's Tekton building Docker images, or building images from GitHub and uploading them to Docker, which might actually be interesting too. It uses Tekton, and then it uses I can show it off for a minute. I don't think I have enough time to show it off right now, but it uses Tekton, and then it uses, let me see, what was the other name of the service? It's the Google service that actually does Docker images within Docker.
Yeah, if people find them interesting, we'll get them going for the next few sessions.
Kaneko, there you go. So Google's Kaneko project. So what's interesting about that is, instead of using something like Jenkins or something like that, you could build pipelines and different tasks with Tekton, point it at a GitHub repository. It'll download that information into a container. It'll use Kaneko to build a image, and then it'll push it directly to Docker Hub for you after you've configured your connection information, so you can upload it, which is interesting and helpful when you're trying to automate the building of images. And I've tried it with Jenkins before, and then run into all the weird things where it's like, I got to have Java within a container to actually be able to connect to it and build it and all that stuff. I don't know. What do you use, Brandon? Do you use anything like that? Are y'all using like Jenkins to build images? Or are y'all automating image creation based off of like different GitHub repositories? Or
Yeah, similar to Jenkins, we use TeamCity, but it follows a lot of the same sort of CI patterns. When a new change is merged into the project, it can rebuild the image, test it in whatever way is implemented for that application, and then a number of build steps later gets spit out in like the total artifact of a product release.
Awesome.
Yeah, running CI/CD is a pretty common use case amongst our enterprise user base. So I reckon we should do that as our next session, just for everyone here. You get a quick preview into. We can sort of talk about using Tekton. We can talk a little bit about using TeamCity as well. But I guess that'll be a good next topic. And if we don't have any questions, I say that's a wrap for the day.
Yeah, that sounds good. Should have made it dim a little bit longer, I think. I was hoping for a couple of questions in between to slow me down. Sped on through it. Next time I'll make sure I time my demo a little bit longer. Maybe take a little bit longer with it to deploy and push things.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Yeah, hopefully everyone got something useful out of that. We have some blog posts.
You're gonna put a blog up with the commands, and we'll always share the video on YouTube as well, right?
Yep. So we're going to put this video on YouTube. I've got another video that's walking through something similar on YouTube that I put up yesterday. And then I can also turn this into a blog post to share the resources that I was using, just to kind of show off like what you can do with a very simple deployment without using a lot of annotations or anything like that.
Yeah, I think especially breaking down the path to getting a proper science cert,
yeah,
would definitely be a useful bit of knowledge to share out there. I know there's a lot of people that are trying to learn and get started, or developers that are looking just to spin up a cluster and get going. And as David pointed out, they don't want to have to fight with all of this. So I think a blog would be a great next step.
It might be useful, Mike, if you take all that YAML that you were using and put it in a repository on Platform 9 community.
Okay.
In the Platform 9 community org, just so all the YAML sitting there and anybody can go grab it and do the thing. That would be nice.
Sounds good. So we do have a Twitch channel. So you're asking about Twitch, VJ. We have a Twitch channel, Platform 9 Sys, that we're kind of getting started on, and we're just kind of going through and like brainstorming and showing off some stuff. Like maybe I'll kind of practice a demo through here and mess up a bunch and finally get it working and figure out like what's going on and troubleshoot it. So like if you are interested in Twitch, we're gonna start getting a little bit more active on there. But for people that are interested, yeah, this is the channel. So this is another way to get in contact with us and kind of see what we're working on. David's been on there a couple times the last couple weeks. He's just kind of brainstorming through different things.
And you can either subscribe to this channel to get notifications when we go live, or just keep an eye on our Twitter, on Platform 9 Sys Twitter. And we usually will announce in minutes, an hour or so before we're going to go live.
Yeah. We'll try to get a schedule and stuff put up too. That way we can get some communication from everyone to see like what you're interested in actually seeing a demo on. And we're still working on what the format's going to be. So hopefully we can get some people from different orgs within our company too on there, just talking about different things, and get some experts like Brandon, like we have on the AMA, and expand it beyond the Fortnite sessions.
Yeah, if you're ever looking for some help on demand, our Slack channel is there and waiting. Plenty of people that are willing to help.
All right, and to join the Slack channel, it's just at the bottom of our page down here, Platform 9 Kate Slack group. Just click that, and then you can join, and then you can reach out about like free tier stuff and ask other questions.
Yeah, cool. All right, thank you all for your time. Hopefully that was useful. As always, these are for everyone that dials in. So if you have questions, that was the time. If not, reach out on Slack, and see you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Mike.